Okay, I think we've got a few attendees kicking through now. Yeah, I can see everybody starting to join, so that's great. Okay, I think we've got a good number of attendees here with us today, so I think we'll begin. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we officially kick off, I'm going to just start off with a little bit of expectations on how today is going to work. We have a quick welcome session here to kick off and an audience poll for you as well to get you involved straight away. And we have a fantastic keynote session to start us off today on the global scholarship landscape. And that's going to run for about 30 to 40 minutes with our keynote speaker. We have Jonah here with us today, and Jonah is the Senior Vice President of the Institute of International Education. He's probably no stranger to you. Jonah plays a key leadership role at IIE in developing and managing scholarship and higher education programs with foundations, corporations, and government agencies. Jonah also supervises IIE's program development efforts, the corporate and foundation funded work. He oversees offices in China, in India, in Thailand, and in Mexico, and serves on the board of affiliates in Indonesia. And during his career, Jonah has also developed new large-scale education initiatives with numerous US government agencies and other governments around the world, as well as leading multinational companies such as Microsoft, Cargill, Time Warner, Hilton, and Goldman Sachs, and private foundations as well, like Carnegie and Ford and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. So Jonah, it is an honor to have you here with us today. Welcome. And we'll get to his keynote very soon. We're also going to have a special Q&A session with 4 additional speakers joining us from Colombia, from Mexico, from the US, and the UK. And then we're going to have a short break. After that, we're going to come back for another session on work-integrated learning, and that's a separate session. So you'll need to sign out of this one and sign into that new one, and I'll pop the link into the chat for you today so that you can sign up if you haven't done so yet. So that's our full agenda for today. We're going to be with you for about 2.5 hours and finish at approximately 4:45 London time. And we've got a lot in store for you today. Now, this week, from one corner of the globe to another, we're going to connect with each other in dozens of meetings and participate in dialogues with our colleagues to learn and exchange new ideas about how to tackle the challenges that 2020 has thrown at us. I want to thank each one of you for taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us. And I'd like to say a special thank you to our esteemed speakers who are kind enough and bold enough to share their thoughts and their insights with us today. I hope that these discussions will inspire you to continue to work hard in the months and years to come. We know that it will be challenging. It will probably be surprising too. And hopefully these months ahead will also be encouraging. And through all of this disruption that we're facing now and all of the students that you support, it's my hope that we all rise together stronger with new skills, with a different mindset, and perhaps a new appreciation for some of those little things in life, like those airplane peanuts and the hotel slippers that we all might be missing so much. So first, I'd like to do a quick poll to get you all engaged right away. So we've got a little poll to see who's with us today. So you should see that on your screen now. And go ahead, we'll get a few minutes going for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Good, good. I can see some results coming through. Okay, I think that's most of you. Still missing a few. So give it a few more seconds. Okay, that's 82% of you. So I think that's a pretty good mix. Let's go ahead and see those results on the screen there. So, okay, you should be able to see those results. So what's nice to see today actually is that we've got a pretty good mix of attendees with us, some who are fairly new to the sector, some who are old hands. So we've got some good questions I hope to expect from some newbies and some insights and wisdom to share from those who have weathered the storm of scholarships over the years. Nice mix of organizations as well. And I was curious to learn from you all what was more of a challenge for you today in terms of student engagement or partner engagement. So we see more of a skew towards partner engagement. Certainly with student engagement, that is a challenge, I think, for all of us around the world. We're all suffering from a little bit of Zoom fatigue, but hopefully not today, at least not yet. And hopefully we can also share some tips with each other on how to maybe boost some engagement online with students. A lot of gamification techniques can work really well. Certainly with partner engagement, it is a challenge not being able to spend time together physically, but we do, of course, hope that this event does help to facilitate those strong partnerships. And I do want to encourage all of you to get involved in the symposium this week, today, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in order to do so, here's a few tips for you. You'll see the chat window on the side of your screen, so do go ahead, say hello to your fellow attendees. If you're a bit shy and you don't want to speak, you can also use the chat to share some insights or some thoughts or some questions. You'll also see that there's a Q&A section of your screen. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask our speakers, just pop it into the Q&A section, and I'll be sure to pass your question on to the speakers. If you've got a technical question as well, if something's not working for you, that's a good spot to use as well. By default, you'll probably notice that as an attendee, you are muted so that we can give our focus to our speakers, but I am able to unmute you so that you can ask a question and to share your thoughts and your energy with us as well. So you can use the raise hand feature for that one. Okay, so let's move ahead. I would now like to end the poll here for us. And there we go. And also just switch views a little bit. And there we go. So this is a familiar face to you as well. I would like to introduce Mr. Samir Zaviri, the president and CEO of BMI, who will tell us about some of the incredible new initiatives that the team have launched for us this year. Samir, take it away.
Thanks, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Jackie, for the introduction and the fantastic symposium program you put together. Here in London, like many places in the world, we're about to go back into a second lockdown, and it's obviously been a very difficult year for everyone, not only personally, but also with how we work and communicate with each other. Therefore, as an organization dedicated to bringing people together, whether it's students to meet in institutions via international education fairs, high school counselors and agents via our workshops, or scholarship organizations via these global and regional summits, it has particularly impacted us here at BMI. And like everyone, we have found new ways to work. In the last few months, we've organized a series of very successful online fairs where nearly 300 institutions have been able to meet thousands of students who, despite the pandemic, are still planning to study abroad. We're also organizing events on behalf of other organizations like Education Ireland, and later this week for COLFUTURO in Colombia. But above all, I'm very pleased we could bring all of you together this week. Of course, like everyone, I would much rather be meeting you personally. And so we've already scheduled the next in-person global summit here in London in May, when hopefully the world will have begun to return to some sort of normality. However, in the next few days, we'll have a total of 120 delegates from 28 countries, and already 900 meetings have been scheduled between the participating scholarship organizations and international education institutions. So I mean, it's really turned out to be an excellent summit, and we're really looking forward to everyone connecting with each other. And the symposium has some fantastic sessions, which if you've had a chance to look at the program, and some great speakers over the next few days. And this symposium will allow you to gain additional insights on the situation in different parts of the world, as well as how best to work with each other in the near future. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Guard Me and Stay Club, as well as EduCanada, who will be leading one of the main sessions later today. But now I would like to turn to Jonah and IIE. Jackie's already told you about our fantastic speaker, and there's little I can add to that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about IIE. For me, they're one of the most important organizations in international education. And apart from the valuable service and insights they provide to educational organizations across the world, things like open doors and other activities they have, they always seem to be the first to respond in times of crisis. In recent years, they have set up scholarship funds and launched appeals to help Syrian refugees. And more recently, they've been helping students who are studying in the US, who have been greatly affected by COVID. Maybe they've got parents that have not been able to send funds, or governments who've stopped their funding. And IIE, as always, has taken the lead. So it is therefore my great honor to introduce the Vice President of an organization I greatly admire and respect, Jonah Kokodyniak. Thank you very much, Jonah, and I'll let you take over.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie, and thank you so much, Samir. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you for pulling together such a fantastic panel. I look forward to our discussion later. And I similarly would like to acknowledge the important role that BMI plays in convening scholarship practitioners with higher education institutions. I think these symposiums fill an incredibly valuable void and create a unique venue that wouldn't exist were it not for you and all of the delegates who are joining us today. And I would add that while it's unfortunate we're not together in person, I think the changes that are taking place and the continuing demand for scholarship programs actually increase the need for convenings between higher education institutions and scholarship programs. So I'll say that I look forward to the discussions in the next few days and to someday being together in London when it's safe. But I think this is going to be an incredibly important discussion, both this morning and later on. My focus today will be on addressing a number of questions about global scholarship programs, their impact, and how they're changing. And I'd preface this by saying that many changes were taking place within scholarship programs pre-COVID and over the past few years. Foreign governments, especially in the Gulf, have launched new programs with new priorities. Many organizations are developing sophisticated technologies and new ways of measuring the return on investment of scholarship programs. And many companies and other sponsors are thinking about how they can revise selection criteria or develop new programs to support populations with urgent financial and other needs. In the next 25 minutes or so, I want to focus on addressing a few questions, utilizing data from IIE and our partners, as well as my anecdotal perspective from working closely with both public and private sector scholarship programs. Some of the key questions I'd like to look at are globally, where are students going, both in general and within scholarship programs? And I'll look at some figures both from IIE's Open Doors and our Project Atlas sponsors. I'd like to talk a little bit about what fields and sectors scholarship programs are prioritizing. So where they focus traditionally and what I see as some of the new emerging sectors that scholarship programs are focusing on. I'd like to look at the impact that scholarship programs are having and specifically share with you some data from surveys of IIE and our partners' alumni. And then look both pre-COVID and as a result of COVID, how the practice of scholarship management is changing and what I think will be part of the new normal, as well as what areas are especially challenging within scholarship programs at this current time. So with that, I'm going to pull up my presentation and begin going through the slides. Great. Can you see the slides? The first one I'd like to look at is just a broad overview. And I think as many of you know, based on OEC data, there are about 5.5 to 6 million international students in 2018. It's twice the number there were in 2005, an increase of 300,000 students from 2017. There's no definitive data specifically on the number of students who study on scholarship programs annually, though at least in the US, within Open Doors, there's about 22% of international students. So out of the million or so students who are in the US annually, about 22% of those are studying on scholarships. And the breakdown within those is about 17% are on scholarships from US colleges and universities, and approximately 5% are studying with funding from foreign governments, foreign universities, and foreign private sponsors. So while it's a relatively small portion of the pie, it is a critical population for universities, both in the United States and other countries. According to our Project Atlas data, and this is data we collect with about 30 plus partners around the world, the top 5 has remained relatively the same in 2020. So the US, the UK, China, Canada, and Australia support the vast majority of students internationally and within scholarship programs. And that we found that the top 10 Atlas partners host about 80% of the 5.6 million students. And that's remained fairly stable, but I'd submit that there are significant changes taking place in terms of who hosts international students, as well as under the surface, which institutions within each country are hosting students. Looking at the top 5, nearly every country, with some exceptions, continues to experience growth in the number of students. So Canada, Australia continue to see within the top 5 the largest percentage growth of about 16% and 10% respectively. This is especially driven by growth in Indian students. So the US has seen relatively modest increases of Indian students, whereas Australia and Canada have seen especially strong growth, with about 40,000 in the case of Canada and 18,000 from the prior year. The UK also, during the same period, and we're using British Council statistics here, experienced about 5.2% growth, again driven in large part by growth in Indian students. And these are mostly fee-paying students or students who are funded by their own universities. And it's not a surprise that China and India remain without a doubt the largest sources for most of the hosting countries. I would add that in large part what we're seeing in China as a host country is a concentration of students from the Asia region, as well as increasing numbers of, in most cases, non-degree students coming from the United States. One of the interesting trends that we're especially focused on documenting is looking at the capacity, both capacity and momentum within the major host countries. And so, this breaks down sort of the percentage of international students as the percentage of the whole total higher education population in these top 5 countries. And interestingly, while the US continues to host the most students, it's a relatively modest portion of overall student enrollment, indicating that there is significant capacity to host more students. And I'd say that's the same in the case of China. In the UK, Canada, and Australia, we're seeing a very large portion of the overall higher ed population that's made up of international students. And I think that's, primarily a testament to the strong marketing efforts and success in attracting international students, but I do think many institutions will begin to face questions about whether they're positioned for further growth or whether they've, supporting about as many international students as they're capable of. So I think that will be interesting to watch. And I would add that within scholarship programs, there are also questions around concentration, as specific lists of sending countries focus on fewer universities, and student decisions are also incredibly driven by word of mouth. So I think one thing that will be valuable to discuss, in the coming days is around individual institutions' capacity to host greater numbers of students, as well as whether they're seeing large concentrations of students coming from one country, but perhaps would like to increase diversity with students from additional sort of recruitment resistant countries in the case of their institutions. Moving away from the data, and this is looking more at my experience working with both companies and private foundations, but also more and more governments around the world. I want to share with what I'm seeing in terms of fields and sectors that programs are prioritizing. And I'd say that, traditionally scholarship programs, while many focus on advancing mutual understanding, have focused on kind of key STEM and workforce development related fields, as well as other fields critical to building policy making capacity, building health capacity. And so traditionally, when I've looked at both number of participants in IIE programs, and we've been managing scholarships for now 100+ years, the traditional focus has been on a set of programs which have included agriculture, business and management, education and management, engineering, which continues to make up probably the largest portion, but has seen less growth than some other STEM fields in recent years, English language training, health and public policy. And those have sort of generally made up the largest number of participants, both in our programs, but in terms of students that we see in our data coming to the top host countries. When I look at new programs that we're working on and being asked to develop, I'm seeing a greater focus on some of the emerging fields, and many. It's interesting to see the sort of coalescence in both the private sector, but also governments in especially AI and data science. So we're now managing multiple scholarships, whether that's for the government of the UAE or companies like Bloomberg. There is an increasing emphasis on building a pipeline of talent, both from overseas and within countries. And I anticipate that universities will continue to roll out new programs in these fields that will be attractive both to students and to scholarship sponsors. The other area we're seeing, quite a lot of growth is in computer science, and to the point that at least within the U.S. we're seeing, almost as many computer science students as engineering students coming from overseas. Interestingly, there's a renewed focus on fine and applied arts, and so I think the momentum within STEM scholarships to transition them to STEAM scholarships in recent years has accelerated increasingly, and I think many of you have seen the announcements around the new within Saudi Arabia, the new Saudi Cultural Scholarship Program, which is prioritizing a host of fields from anthropology to film to design that have never been included in most national scholarship programs from the Gulf. I also think we're seeing, an increasing focus on interdisciplinary fields, whether those are in STEM or computer science related fields like cybersecurity, or looking at much more kind of applied sciences and design or digital media. I'd say we're seeing a greater focus on life sciences than health, perhaps traditionally. And then there's been a broad emphasis, especially in many of the Gulf scholarship programs, but not exclusively, on focusing on tourism and hospitality industries, and many more students who are coming to the US, but also larger hosting countries and institutions in those fields. So that's sort of the picture I'm seeing when I look at fields of study and sectors. I also think it's equally important to note some of the changes in sort of the non-academic or other aspects of scholarship management that are changing, and in addition to simply supporting sponsored students to come study, and a few of the trends I'm seeing is that scholarship programs, especially those funded by governments, are prioritizing building human capital and workforce pipelines that support economic interests. And so, in addition to, for example, many of the Gulf governments that are supporting large new giga projects in sectors like cultural sectors or hospitality and tourism, there's also very much a focus on supporting practical experience. And so whether those are internship programs or co-op programs, we're seeing those as much interest and demand for those components as well. We're also very much seeing a focus on leadership development. And so as much as this is about gaining hard technical skills, I think there's a real sincere interest on the part of scholarship program sponsors in supporting leadership development, thinking outside the box, and being able to measure students who bring, leadership capabilities to their scholarship program. And so just a few examples of programs that we're managing in which we see that are, for example, working with the private sector in a program that we've managed for Cargill for a number of years in 6 different countries around the world. We bring students together with Cargill executives, but also leadership coaches within their home countries to undertake, team building and other activities. But we also bring them together annually at the headquarters of the company in Minneapolis to hear from executives, to hear from diverse leaders about the paths they've taken to success and leadership within the institution. We're also seeing, I think, in the past, many scholarship programs have been, separated from large-scale research partnerships and others initiatives that universities have implemented. And what we're seeing in II, in addition to scholarship programs, we manage a lot of programs that provide grants to universities in 2 or often 3 or more countries to build large-scale research collaborations, whether those are in environmental sciences, whether they're to create distance learning programs. But we're more and more seeing that those programs have a link to mentoring, developing research talent, identifying graduate students who might come for a short-term stay within a scholarship program at the university. And so I think we're going to see more integration between large-scale research partnerships and traditional scholarship programs. And I see that not only on the university side, but also governments who are supporting scholarships in the context of large-scale development initiatives will want to both include scholarship programs as part of those research collaborations and integrate them. And so what I think that may lead to are, is in some cases a move away from, single large-scale national scholarship programs to multiple programs that are addressing increasingly specific needs within the context of funding agencies and new projects. The other trend we're seeing, and I think this relates to them, is, and I think I'll be interested in hearing what our university panelists are hearing, is a move away from kind of a single traditional list, and this is especially in the context of foreign government funded scholarship programs, to a more nuanced list of eligible institutions. And so, traditionally there's been, a focus on, the top 200 or the top 100 universities within within programs, or often institutions that have been identified by scholarship sponsors, based on lasting relationships or traditions of supporting students to attend, one institution in the U.S. and there's been, reputation has spread as a result of word of mouth. What we're seeing now is that funding agencies are developing more nuanced lists that, yes, they may have, a set of 40 or 50 global institutions, but then within each field, they're taking a much harder look, often at the 10 to 20 to 30 institutions within those specific fields. And this is especially true at the graduate level, that are meeting the needs of supporting research and students within those specific fields, whether those are arts, sciences, humanities, or social sciences. And so I think that presents an opportunity for institutions, perhaps who may have been excluded from lists, to educate funding agencies and sponsors about specific programs they have and initiatives they're undertaking that are aligned with the specific goals of new scholarship programs. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in this area. And then I think we're also seeing funding agencies provide greater support for students during the university admissions process and throughout their studies. And so quite often, students have only become eligible for government scholarship programs after they themselves have gained admissions to a university overseas. I see that changing more to funding agencies now identifying talented students based on motivation, potential, aptitude, and yes, test scores will continue to be important, but I think they'll also develop more nuanced selection criteria and then provide services and support to students for carrying out the application process to pursue studies overseas. And so I think that again reinforces the need for institutions to build relationships with funding agencies and communicate to them areas in which they're building especially strong or innovative programs. I'm going to next look at how we have been measuring the return on investment of programs, but I think I'll pause here, and Jackie, I believe we're going to do another poll of our participants that hopefully will continue to inform this presentation and the discussion.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Jonah. I'm loving this so far. We've got another poll in process here. So just launched that one now. So you should see that on your screen, everybody. Go ahead and answer those 2 quick questions for us. Let's hear from our audience. And don't forget to use the chat box as well to share some of your thoughts. I'd be curious to hear from our attendees if you're experiencing some of what Jonah has touched upon. And don't forget to use the Q&A as well.
Great, so I'll wait a moment to see the results and then continue whenever you're ready, Jackie.
Okay, perfect. Still coming through. We've got a couple of responses in, about a third of the way through our responses. So we'll give it about a minute or so, and then we'll launch the results. Okay, I think we've gotten in some pretty good amount of results. I'll give you guys 10 more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and pull up those results there. Jonah, can you see these as well on your screen?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Great. So yeah, I think we're all quite curious to understand what the situation is around the world. It's so different for all of us. So we were interested to find out how many of your students, and particularly today your funded students, might have gone back home at some point and are continuing their studies remotely. So we can see about 35% of you are telling us about 11 to 20% of your funded students have gone back home. There's still a good 10% of you, though, that are saying more than 75% of your funded students have gone back home. I imagine this might depend on where those students are based. We have a couple of speakers on our panel on Wednesday from Australia and New Zealand. With the academic year being different over there, they did tend to lose a lot of their students who went back for the Chinese New Year and then weren't able to get back into Australia. So that might be the case for some of you joining us today. And then also turning the tables and looking at how many different sponsorship organizations do you work with as an institution. So we see about 40% saying less than 10. So a good opportunity to enhance those partnership relations, of course, this week at the summit event. And then we've also got 10% saying more than 60 different scholarship organizations. So again, a really good mix of our audience today. Jonah, I'll let you think about that. Maybe you have some thoughts to share as well. And I want to turn this the virtual stage back over to you.
Great, thank you, Jackie. It's quite fascinating. I think especially the data around number of students who returned home. I'll touch on that when I share some of the findings that we've found in our surveys of higher education institutions in response to COVID, and so I'll touch on that shortly. The next area I wanted to talk about is what impact scholarships have. So what is the return on investment of scholarship programs, and share with you just the findings of two surveys. One that IIE did of about 4,000 of our alumni who participated in programs over a 10-year period. And so these were alumni in a broad range of scholarship programs, but primarily international scholarship programs, whether those are US government or private sector or foreign government funded. And then look at some of the data from a study we're doing that's still continuing, a 10-year tracking study of participants in the Ford International Fellowships Program. So with respect to the broad 4,000 alumni of our programs, we had a number of key findings that we published last year. And I think, alumni work in a variety of industries, but what we found is that of scholarship recipients, about 89% currently reside and work in their home country. And when you think that, consider that many scholarship programs have as a goal either promoting mutual understanding or workforce and economic development within the sending country. I think that's a pretty impressive statistic that students who participate in scholarship programs are eager to return to their communities and support their future growth. Another key finding is that alumni find their experiences had a very important impact on their careers. So, 95% report that they've been able to attain their academic goals, and just under 90 report that they've been able to attain their professional goals. And so I think this demonstrates that, students who participate in scholarships not only are committed to academic success, but also to their professional success as well. They also use it as a credential. So we find that about 85% of our alumni list their participation in a scholarship program on their resume. And 70% report having discussed it in interviews specifically. And I think especially for programs that are adding more interactive and leadership development components, this is being viewed as, something that distinguishes them from purely participating in an overseas international program. We also find that students report gaining a wide range of skills, especially foreign language skills. And that's true in the case both of individuals from some of the large host countries that study abroad, as well as international students who come and earn a degree, in most cases in English. And then many alumni report having made positive impacts on their communities and their organizations. So 75% report that they've become a role model within their community. And about the same number report having made some type of organizational improvement, whether that's perhaps founding an NGO or a nonprofit organization, or undertaking some strategic planning or new initiative or new venture within their organization. Next, I wanted to share the results of the Ford International Fellowship Program. So this was a program that was funded over a period of about 15 years from 2000 to 2013-14, and supported just over 4,000 individuals, all told, from 22 different countries, in most cases to earn a master's degree either within their home country or overseas. The survey that we looked at, we had responses from just under 1,300 of those alumni, and found some pretty impressive results. So as you'll see, 97% completed their degrees, 89% received a promotion at work. Just under 90% were committed to the overall issue that the program was focused on, which was advancing social justice globally. And 83% report being in leadership positions of some kind. We also have taken a nuanced look at what do people report as a result of their scholarship, or develop as a result of their scholarship program. And so this group of, again, just under 1,300 alumni of the program are a prolific group. And I think some of these are measures that you could think about how to adapt to your own scholarship programs. And, I'd be happy to connect you with our evaluation team at IIE to brainstorm about how that could work. But we've been able to gauge, the outputs in terms of things like journal articles, reports, works of art for students who have had a focus on the arts and culture, conference presentations, books that have been published. And then obviously, a big part of any scholarship program is communicating and the impact. And so we've measured in terms of both digital media and traditional media, the amount of coverage that scholarship programs receive. So I think this is a pretty strong testament to the fact that scholarship programs work. And again, I'll be very interested to hear both how the panelists from scholarship programs as well as institutions look at the ROI of both sponsored students and new scholarship initiatives. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID, both on higher education institutions as well as scholarship programs. And IIE has undertaken, we've undertaken 4 surveys of U.S. higher education institutions since March. We began first by looking specifically at the impact of Chinese students, and then have focused more on the broader impact of both international students on campus, study abroad, and research abroad by faculty, as well as how campuses are planning for the future. And so the data I will share is from our most recent survey, which was done in July and August, specifically looking at how institutions are responding to the crisis and thinking about the future. And many of you know, with respect to your own institutions, how you've adapted and pivoted. Our survey focused on, we had about 520 respondents who host, more than half of the international students in the United States each year. And some of the things we found on the institutional side, not surprising, about 9 in 10 have adopted a new instruction approach for the fall 2020 semester, and about 87% of institutions are offering hybrid instruction of some kind. I'll caveat this by saying the next sort of major data announcement that we'll make at IIE will be in 2 weeks' time, when we release not only the results of Open Doors 2019-2020, but also the results of a fall snapshot survey that's currently being conducted of US institutions. Institutions have implemented numerous key prevention techniques, including mandatory face coverings, restrictions to on-campus events, and then restrictions on social areas. So all of those were the highest sort of precautions that are being put in place. About 84% have anticipate ending the fall 2020 semester early. So the most common trend we're seeing is that students will return home, or that physical classes will discontinue around the Thanksgiving holiday, and the remainder of the semester will continue either online or independent. We found, of these students, more than 57,000 international students accepted enrollment in the fall semester. And a majority of them are providing the international students with the option to defer enrollment to 2021. So I think, all of our surveys have shown both significant interest among international students in studying overseas, and in this case, the US, and very high numbers of deferrals, which I think shows to the optimism of international students and their sponsors to continuing to study in person overseas when it's safe to do so. And what we found, and again, this is specific to the US, is that during the summer, 40,000 international students remained enrolled on campus, and that 91% of institutions anticipated that the majority of international students would continue their studies in the fall. So, while I think we're all bracing for, or our experience drops in enrollment of students physically on campus, the demand for students to continue their educations is incredibly high. In terms of more anecdotally, and here's the data I just shared with you, higher education institutions are also, and this, is the final sort of data we found around study abroad, especially by Americans, that there remains, even though while just about every program is on hold this fall, there remains quite a lot of interest in, and this is among American students and institutions, to study abroad overseas in the future. And I think this is probably, hopefully, provide some optimism for colleagues, especially at institutions that host large number of American students, whether those are in the UK, Ireland, Europe, China, or other top destinations. And many institutions, at least in this case, it's about more than 80%, say they'll continue to promote study abroad for students in the future. And again, now here's moving to my more anecdotal take on sort of what we're seeing from both universities and scholarship programs with respect to sponsored students. And this is, thinking about the government, private sector, and other programs we manage. And I'd say in most cases, students who are on scholarships and on campuses are continuing in their programs largely. Most of them do not want to see a disruption. We've worked, for example, with the Schwartzman Scholars Program, which supports students to go to China, on continuing that program, even though students are now in about 50 plus different countries around the world. We're also seeing, in many cases, scholarship programs select new cohorts of students. So surprisingly, we're seeing actually, in some cases, application numbers at record highs for scholarship programs. And I think, there are a number of reasons for this. I think in part the economic situation and challenges in a number of job markets may be, increasing the motivation for students to either pursue receiving funding or decide that this is a good time to spend the next 2 years earning a graduate degree. But we're seeing great demand for programs, and in many cases, programs are continuing to select new students. In most cases, we're seeing travel to new destinations paused until 2021. And so in terms of spring study, I'm hearing a lot that decisions will be made in mid-November or mid-December about whether students, large numbers of students will physically travel within programs. And anecdotally, I'm also hearing that regional exchanges will most likely be the first to resume. We're seeing in a lot of programs that many elements of programming for new students, whether those are pre-departure orientations, intensive English programs, and other networking activities, are continuing in virtual formats. And so I think, those are some that I think may continue virtually. And then, of course, both scholarship programs and universities are revisiting admissions policies, especially around, test requirements and others. And I think it'll be interesting to see what stays and what changes. And then this is my last slide, kind of taking all of this into account. How is the practice of scholarship management changing? And I would say that, in addition to the data I shared, we've also been doing very specific surveys within individual scholarship programs to gauge appetites for students to study overseas. What we're hearing is in many cases, students are prepared to undertake a year online or a semester or even 2 years. But that demand for in-person study remains high, but there is an openness to a hybrid or other model. We're finding that the interest is not as high in a full bachelor's or master's degree completely delivered online. We're also seeing, I'm seeing anecdotally that institutions that made a commitment to supporting international institutions are benefiting, fairly well. They've been better prepared to support their housing needs, their socio-emotional needs, and quickly adapt to whether that's supporting students at a campus they might have overseas or through another mechanism. I'm also seeing that there are key processes, whether that's selection, in many cases, we've flown selection panelists to get, thousands of selection panelists to be together to conduct selection. That has continued online quite well. Student interviews have taken place online quite well. And then I think that's also the situation has caused us to rethink, a number of outreach and recruitment strategies that may be actually more effective when transitioned to kind of a virtual outreach or marketing approach as opposed to, larger scale in-person travel and convenings. And then finally, there's a lot of innovation around internships that I think has made having an internship within this environment continue. I think finally, I would just say that we're seeing a much more nuanced look, and I think this remains to be seen in terms of how families and sponsors look at health and safety protocols. So I think they will, look more and more to either their own internal agencies that manage scholarship programs, if that's done through a government agency, or a third-party organization like IIE that manages a portion of their program, to have in place very robust, not only, health and safety protocols, but also socio-emotional protocols, understanding of what trauma students have been through and how this will impact students, and to have very clear measures in place. And I think as part of that, this will only increase the need for the evaluation and learning measurements to include, much faster and more more rapid analysis of how students are benefiting or what challenges they're facing within their scholarship programs. And all of this said, I think our panelists will have an incredibly valuable perspective on all of these components, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So I will conclude there and turn it back over to you, Jackie.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonah. That was fantastic. I have lots of questions myself, and I think our panelists probably do too. I am going to bring them up on stage with us now. So just bear with me one moment. Let's see. And also, by the way, to our fabulous attendees out there, please go ahead and pop some questions into the chat for us as well. Okay, so I think we have everyone. Double checking my list. Don't want to leave anybody out. So Jonah, a couple of really interesting points that came out that I made some notes about. I love the example from Cargill with the leadership development program, the work experience, working with the private sector. You mentioned there were 6 countries as well, and the fact that the students can come together with the executives. If I don't know, this is on the spot, but I don't know if you have a link or some place where we can maybe learn a little bit more about that online. If you do that, that would be fantastic. I also noted your comment about 89% of funded alumni who return back home, and that might link up a bit to our next session on work experience and bringing that knowledge back home as well. So that was interesting. And I'm also very keen to hear from our panelists about the interest in going abroad. Certainly from my conversations over the last couple of weeks with institutions from Australia to the US, the interest is still very high. Just as you mentioned, Jonah, students might have one chance to do this, so they are very keen to go abroad. What I've heard mostly in Europe is that a lot of those exchanges that maybe were going to go further afield to Australia or to the US are now actually looking to stay closer to home in Europe, just because it's a little bit easier to get back if anything changes, and it's a little bit more of a sure bet. But perhaps Joe as well, being based here in the UK as well, will have some other thoughts on that. And yeah, those health and safety protocols, certainly we've seen a lot in the news this year about health and safety, mental health for us, for our colleagues that are adjusting, as well as for the students. And I'm also interested to hear from some of our scholarship panelists about those qualifications for students. You made a great point, Jonah, about the interest being so high now. Certainly economies might have more to do with that, as you mentioned. We also do see a rising interest in graduate programs, master programs, when we have economic downturns. So that makes it more difficult perhaps to choose the right students, because we'll be flooded with even more students who are qualified. So I'm keen to hear from our scholarship organizations if they're changing some requirements for students, and particularly the requirements for institutions around those priority areas that you mentioned. So let's now turn to the panel. Joining me, we have a group of fantastic experts that we've been able to bring together. So thank you once again for taking time to be with us today. We have here Jerónimo Castro Jaramillo, the Executive Director of COLFUTURO in Colombia. We have Maria Elisa Rojas Coello, the Executive Director of FUNED, the Mexican Foundation for Education, Technology, and Science. And joining us from the US, we have Don Back, the Director of the Language and Culture Institute at Virginia Tech University. And here on our shores, we have Jo Power from the University of Glasgow in the UK, where she's responsible for international recruitment and partnerships and external relations. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. Let's turn straight to you. Would you like to share some thoughts and reactions on Jonah's presentation? Perhaps we could start with maybe some demand changes that you might be seeing around some of those priority areas.
So certainly here we have been seeing, actually this year we had a significant increase in the number of scholarship students. We typically see toward 20 organizations sending students to Virginia Tech, and we've seen a slight decline in the number of organizations sending. However, we have seen a great increase in the numbers of students who are on scholarships. So about a 60% increase over last year. So that was very good news for us. Of course, it is a lot of this is coming out of the Middle East from countries like the UAE and Oman and Saudi Arabia and others. We're seeing greater emphasis on sending students who are qualified at the start for undergraduate or graduate studies, much less emphasis on sending students to preparatory programs like English language. And in terms of the majors that those students are going into, they are, I think, typical of those that Jonah was pointing out. They are largely STEM majors, engineering majors. Over the past number of years for here at Virginia Tech, we have been expanding the numbers of majors offered, offering more specific majors in engineering fields and in the science fields, in health-related fields. And as a result, we're attracting more students into those majors. And part of the reason for doing that was hearing from people like our sponsoring organizations that have an interest in sending students into more specific areas of study.
If I could just add a few comments from the kind of the UK side, or from the University of Glasgow at least. In terms of our numbers, we're still counting up our numbers at the moment, but we feel that it's been surprisingly quite positive this year, considering everything that's happened. I think some parts of the world, like the Middle East, have been quite positive. They've been very solid. We haven't seen big increases, but we've seen a kind of solid presence of students continuing to come. Maybe other parts of the world have seen a bit of a drop in parts of Southeast Asia and also Latin America. There are some, for example, scholarship bodies that have had to withdraw their funding or limit their funding for this year because of other priorities. So we're noticing that a little bit as well in the UK and at Glasgow.
Maria, Jerónimo, coming from Latin America, I can't help but turn to you.
Well, on our side, the numbers in the demand side from the students have been increasing over the last couple of years, and also because we've been working very hard on increasing that demand and having well-qualified students to be accepted to foreign universities. However, for this year, it was a little bit difficult because of the partnership we have with our government, specifically in terms of budgeting and other priorities due to the pandemic, and also to new national priorities because of the relatively new government. So we have had a very big pressure on trying to accommodate that demand and try to find the funding. And it has been particularly challenging as well because of the visa restriction and the immigration restrictions that we're seeing, because part of the government scholarship required the students to be in the country that they're going to study. So on our side, from the FUNED part of the funding, we were able to provide the funds for students who want to or that have to study online. So it's been a very difficult year. I think we've dropped our numbers in terms of what we supported last year to this year. I think it's going to be less than half. We still don't have the final numbers, but it's been a big drop back, and we are trying to find new ways and to be a little bit more resilient in terms of being creative and see how we can find other partners to have more funding and support the Mexican students that we know are eager to study abroad. So we are also having big conversations with our partnerships with universities, because they're very open and very eager to receive our Mexican students and to find diversity, but we need to work together to try to find well, the funds, no? And I think we've been a little bit more successful with the European universities than with US universities. But US universities are being more open in terms of immigration policies. So we are very eager to this symposium and these conversations that are going to be coming in the next years to see how we can be more creative and find ways to support more Mexican students.
Yes, and for us in Colombia, it has been an extraordinarily challenging year. We had more than 6,000 students abroad, 3,000 from us, and close to 3,000 from other institutions. So it was extremely challenging at the beginning because we have to deal with all the difficulties in health, in wanting to come back to Colombia and wanting to remain. And when you have like a fixed budget per student and you have already finished disbursing the money to the students and they are trapped there, they cannot finalize their projects, they cannot defend their theses for PhDs, it becomes a nightmare. So that was one very challenging part of what we did. We received a record number of applicants for the call of this year, but we closed the call at the end of February. So we could not check what was happening in terms of the interest of students going abroad. John mentioned that there is a lot of interest for students going abroad, and we have seen that. But the name of the game for us has been flexibility. So we have introduced all type of flexibilization. For example, we are allowing the students to travel in the next, I proposed 3 years, my board accepted 2 years after we select them. So we have, I have been a large stock of students that can go abroad. The board initially decided to reduce the number of selected students from 1,300, that was the average of selected students per year for the last 10 years, and we selected only 1,000 students. But I succeeded last week to convince the board to select the 3,000 additional students. So that allow us to construct together with the students, with the beneficiaries of COLFUTURO, a future. And I think that has been a beautiful part of the whole thing is this desire to keep constructing a future for all the students, for Colombia, for the international space. And that has been extremely moving and motivating because as I mentioned at the beginning, to keep all things going on.
I think we lost you a little bit on the technology there, blanked out. Could you just repeat that last line for us?
Yeah, sorry. No, that we have keep being optimistic and constructing together like this near future, because we cannot afford to stop. We need to keep, we reach and scale and we stop. It is extremely costly to reconstruct things. So we have been very flexible in the sense that we have changed a lot of the conditions for the students to use the support by COLFUTURO, and we are happy at the end. It has been a beautiful experience in the sense that we have this joint project in which students, institutions abroad, COLFUTURO sponsors have been fighting for constructing like a near future possibility. And we believe and we hope that in the next, I don't know, 6 to 12 months, things will come back to something more close to normal.
I was going to say, we've been working quite closely with COLFUTURO. Jerónimo, I just wanted to confirm, you had originally planned to send 1,000 and you've added 300, not 3,000 more, so it'll be 1,300 this year, I think is what you meant. So,
yeah, sorry, I misspelled.
Yeah.
We were planning to select 1,300 and the board initially decided to select only 1,000. And last week, we selected an additionally 300, no, 3,000, sorry.
Exactly, yeah. And one other thing I was going to say is that we've been holding, just to get the student perspective as well, we've been holding sort of virtual events this last sort of 6 weeks in various regions in Latin America and Asia and the Middle East. And it sort of holds up what everyone's been saying. In the Middle East, we've seen students still looking to go relatively quickly when they can, and strong interest, whereas in Latin America and in Asia especially, we've seen that there's been very strong interest, but almost everyone has immediately said that they're not planning to go until next September at the earliest. No one was interested in even looking at sort of May and others, where some of the countries do have start dates which are every quarter. Whereas in the Middle East, they were even still willing to look at sort of January and February, it certainly was that most people have put off traveling. On the other hand, almost everyone was still very interested, and I think there'll be a lot of pent-up demand as soon as we're all able to travel. I think that doesn't just apply to students, it probably applies to us as all of us wanted to get out and meet the students and parents and be on the road and attend these sort of events in person. So I think it just sort of follows that, but it is definitely the Middle East seems to have held up strongest.
Thank you.
I think there's an interesting theme in terms of just resources required that everyone has spoken to, which is certainly within scholarship programs. You know, we've found the idea that moving all of these things to virtual should be a money saver just isn't true. We've needed to add tons of new staff or new capabilities to adapt to virtual programs, and have spent quite a lot of time educating sponsoring organizations about the need. For example, you may be saving on travel, but you're also needing to invest in new capabilities or expertise. And then the other major area of resource planning we're doing, which Samir alluded to, and I think institutions and scholarship programs are focused on, is what does, you know, whether it's the spring or it seems more likely next fall, what happens when that pent up demand is unleashed and we have, you know, thousands of deferrals in addition to, you know, traditional intake numbers of students. And I think that's something all of us are preparing for.
And on that note, I was curious to hear about the flexibility actually that you mentioned as well, Jerónimo. You know, one silver lining to COVID is that we have seen more flexibility in terms of accepting hybrid or even completely remote online learning. So do you see that might continue? I mean, obviously for the first half of 2021, that's very dominant, but how long do you see that kind of a trend changing? Is this really just a whole shift that we're going to make together as an industry and get more acceptance of online credentialing?
We see that things are changing, but students are desperate to go back to the real places. Mm-hmm. So I see that the whole thing is changing, and the fact that it has become more evident that this hybrid system, and maybe for some cases this virtual education, has acquired a very important participation in the whole thing. But from my conversation with the students, many ones, and Marieli mentioned how they are like delaying their decisions, their key decisions, and that I didn't mention something that is very important. I think is the case for Colombia, but I believe it is also for other countries, and it is the devaluation of the money. So the local currencies has devaluated, so it has become very expensive to go abroad. And that means that the students have started to look to other alternatives in, let's say, Germany, France, Scandinavia, Holland, in places in where the money we provide to them, that it has a cap, can finance 100% of the cost. And they have become very much more conscious of the value of their education. So I think there is a big change there. So the impact of institutions like FUNED in Mexico, like COLFUTURO, has become extremely important, at least for the students coming from Latin America. And the value of the education they are going to receive has become also extremely important, because before they were keen to explore a little bit more, but now they don't have this possibility. But I think I answered a different question to the one you presented to me.
That's okay. Well, I'll put it out there again,
To emphasize.
to get some thoughts on if there will be more acceptance from governments, from employers even, in terms of online credentials. There's also a question that's come to us in the chat about the demand for virtual exchange. Mobility is limited. Okay, virtual is not the same experience, but we don't want to discount it or discredit it either. So what do you see, maybe looking into the crystal ball, as it were, what do you see in terms of the demand for virtual exchanges, the acceptance of online learning going forward?
A brief answer. Yes, there is a change, because it is what we have, and it is what the student have. So that means that this introduced need to accept different type of education, and a lot of laws and a lot of things are happening very rapidly in that direction. But I wonder if that is something that will last, if this whole pandemic will finish sooner. If it lasts for longer, let's say for another year or year and a half, I think there will be major changes. If it finished more rapidly, let's say May, June next year, and the perception is that it is over, I have the feeling that things will go not exactly the same, but will go to something pretty similar to what we had before, with the exception of more awareness around virtual education that was not there, especially not for the labor market. Now there is a conscious in the labor market that virtual education is extremely interesting alternative to look at.
Okay, so more of a temporary stopgap, a temporary solution rather than a long-term shift, perhaps. Panelists, any thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree? Hopes, wishes, dreams?
I would say that I think virtual online learning is raising its value now. So particularly there are some parts of the world that wouldn't really consider it, and they've had to be quite flexible really quickly in considering certainly hybrid models. So we have a lot of online programs that we've been developing in the past few years at Glasgow. We do see them as quite separate to what we're offering in terms of our face-to-face programs. And one thing I do notice, particularly with Latin America, is the experience is almost as important as the program itself and getting the qualification. So I do feel, as Jerónimo was saying, that hopefully I think the market will continue to be good as long as we can get back to that kind of normality relatively soon. And if we can't, that's one part of the world that I'd be a bit more concerned about in terms of how the numbers might look in the future.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we saw again in the fairs is just going back to flexibility, is a lot of institutions have been much more flexible in terms of the admission procedures, what they're accepting in terms of documents and qualifications, but also much later applications. You know, normally for a September enrollment, they may have closed off enrollments back in sort of June or July, and then I know next year people were saying in the events that they would be willing to take applications up to a month or 6 weeks before. The other thing is sort of going back to what Jerónimo says, is that we did notice in that many students did say that, you know, if they were having to study more than one semester online, they wouldn't consider the course, they would just delay completely. But there was a percentage that would do it online. But really, I think it is the fact that you know, students wanting to have the in-person experience, and that's why they'd rather delay than you know, pay for an online course.
Yes, if I could just kind of stretch this a little bit about this willingness, we are seeing an increase in willingness to start programs online. However, at the same time, we're seeing some dissatisfaction with learning in the home environment. And I think this is, as parents, I think we can understand this well. Ones that have been going through this, we're anxious to get our kids out of the house. And I think that's true of the college level as well. I think that parents want to see their students in a real university environment. Now, related to this, what we are seeing with some of our competitors and what we are doing ourselves here at Virginia Tech is we're allowing students to take advantage of opportunities at home institutions in their own countries to be able to transfer those credits back into their major programs at Virginia Tech. A lot of universities are focusing more on attracting transfer students as new students. Those would be students who've begun their programs already at a university back home, but then they're going to transfer into Virginia Tech. So the other thing too that we're seeing is universities working with partner universities overseas in more orchestrated partnerships to host our students, say, overseas. And we have a couple of partner students or partner organizations, universities we're working with to do this, and in India and in China so far. So a lot of interesting trends. Other universities are doing this as well. We're around 20. We've counted so far. Major universities in the United States are starting these overseas partnership programs.
Yeah, and I would add, I think it's important to sort of look at the use of online learning and virtual exchange, which is what the question is about, in the context of, many scholarship and exchange programs in the past 10 years have been prioritizing shorter term exchanges, whether it's, the large Brazil scientific mobility program, which primarily funded, 1 year of overseas study in which students return to their home institutions, or on the sending side, we're noting that Americans who study abroad, especially those with more limited finances, are studying overseas for shorter and shorter periods of time. And so I don't know that those exchanges will go away, but I think there's also something incredibly powerful about combining them with some of the new capabilities and openness to online learning and exchange programs that everyone has noted.
Another interesting trend. Now Jonah has mentioned in his presentation that English language students were really not among the top students coming to the U.S. Anymore. Mostly these are degree students. And what we have seen related to this is that more and more competitors overseas are coming up, and those institutions, private or university-based programs, are actually doing the English language preparatory training, and then students are coming over to the U.S. Now, we have been contacted by several organizations and institutions for helping them to design their own preparatory programs so that they can do this themselves. So that's another interesting trend.
Thank you. I'll just jump to the chat actually, because we've got a nice question here from Maria from Fabai. She asks, many universities get together to work collaboratively on research related to COVID. So there's funds coming together from all around the world. Obviously, everyone's working very hard on vaccines. How could this help designing new sustainable strategies for collaboration? And also, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'll leave you with that. Any thoughts? New collaborations around COVID research, perhaps?
Being from a research university at Virginia Tech, we certainly see this opportunity, and we're actually working even at this moment with other institutions, be it maybe government organizations, a lot of international donor organizations, some partner institutions overseas on vaccines and strategies for improving treatment for COVID-19 and vaccine-related research as well. So one example of that, for example, well, we helped to develop a one of these short, the rapid turnaround COVID tests at a very, very low cost for use in Malawi. So there are certainly opportunities. We have 7 major research institutes here at Virginia Tech and over 60 research centers where students can get involved in this kind of research. So certainly the opportunities are there.
Excellent. Nice to hear. I think one thing COVID has also done on the silver lining front is to try to bring us all together. We've all been equal in this pandemic. So yeah, any other thoughts? I also wanted to come back to that aspect of choosing partners to work with. It did come up in the poll as well that partner engagement is still a challenge. So any thoughts on how your requirements for partners might change? Jonah talked about perhaps getting very specific with certain programs from that 10 to 30 institutions. Again, a little bit less of a focus on the rankings and a little bit more about the experience that an institution provides, or perhaps a specific program. Maria, I see you nodding quite a lot. Maybe you can give some thoughts on that.
Yes, I think Jonah was right on point when he mentioned all of this. We've been working a lot on a program in partnership with COLFUTURO called Líderes en Desarrollo. It's our young leadership program where we're focusing on social mobility, social and economic mobility, and try to democratize access for lower income students to get accepted. And we've noticed that losing focus on specific rankings and being very close-minded in terms of our partnerships will not help the students get accepted and really get to know very good and important programs that can really focus on their impact and their mobility. We recently had a social impact study done in FUNED and tried to see what our return over investment was in terms of what countries they go study and what universities and what programs. And there were a lot of similarities of what Jonah was talking about in his presentation. But we are definitely going to be much more flexible in terms of these partnerships. And I think this is the time to really get to know all these programs and universities. In our last trips to London, we've made fantastic partnerships. It has been extremely fruitful for us and for our students, because we've acknowledged that we're finding better matches in terms of what our student needs and how we can provide those fundings for their needs in terms of these programs.
Excellent. That's great to hear. Any other thoughts? We are sort of coming to close, but before I wrap it up, just to turn to our panel again, if you've got any other thoughts for our attendees who are listening today.
I mentioned flexibility, and Marielle has talked, and your question implied cooperation. I think cooperation is absolutely key. Marielle also mentioned how we have been cooperating in a loose way, but a beautiful way. And that's between 2 supporting agencies, but cooperation with universities. The fact that you can attract the very best students, and through them you can attract the other students that can finance by themselves. So during these times, and that's like my closing thought.
Okay, excellent. Yes, cooperation is a great method or a great concept to end on. I'll also remind you that in that link that I popped into the chat, that's where you'll find all of the recordings from these webinars, but also videos from the institutions that are joining us at the summit and the symposium. So that is a nice way to sort of do some homework, let's say, and catch up on all the great announcements that they have to offer. So do be sure to check that link. that link is also where you can sign up for our next seminar, which is starting in about 15 minutes. So you've got a little bit of a break to stand up and stretch, but don't go too far. We're coming back at about 3:45 p.m. London time for our next session, which is going to focus on work integrated learning, starting out with a presentation from a Canadian perspective, and then opening up to a panel with our guest speakers from Kenya and from Hungary as well. So I want to also say a big thank you to Jonah for an inspiring keynote, and thank you to our speakers for sharing your energy and your knowledge and your insights with us today. We've run out of time, unfortunately, but I think we could have gone on for quite a lot longer. So do make sure to join us on Wednesday and on Friday, where we're going to have more panel discussions. And thank you so much for your time and attention today. And I look forward to seeing you all hopefully in 15 minutes for our next session. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Great to see you all.
Great. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Jackie. Excellent.
Okay, so it's just you and me, Samir, and great, everybody's gone.